G'day everyone, Viv here again from Battle Bunker. I've just gotten through the videos from Bootlegpainting, the ones that Dale had put up about casting with Hirstarts molds. Interesting techniques that he's using there, so I thought I'd throw up my take on how I work with Hirstarts molds. So the first thing I want to start with is mold care, taking care of your molds. As Dale mentioned, and as you can see from Bruce's website, he's got a wealth of information there. If you want to get into casting, not just with Castlemolds from Hirstarts, but all the other type of molds that you can get from Linker and all those other molds, they're 20mm scale molds, etc. You need to take care of your molds. I always keep my molds in an airtight Ziploc bag with a little bit of baby powder in them. It just helps to keep the mold surface fresh. Because it's silicone, silicone will dry out after several years. Now I've had these molds since 2005. I've cast each of these molds hundreds and hundreds of times. The next one is how you stack your molds. Now you just saw me chuck it into the bin just to get it out of the way. But what I'll do when I'm sorting these out is make sure that I'm stacking them on top of each other flat. So the molds are never going to be bent. I make sure that they're 5 or 6 high and I stack them neatly. You want to make sure that they're all stacked neatly. So normally I don't fold the bags over. I just stack them with the bags like that so they're nice and flat. That's going to help make sure the molds aren't flexing and bending while you've got them in storage. I never go more than 6 high, as Bruce mentions on his website, only stack them 6 high. Some of the molds from Bruce that you can get are resin cast molds. I'll talk about casting in resin further on in the series. Some of the molds are bigger than the other molds. They're also different heights, different thicknesses for the pieces that you cast. So make sure with the higher pieces or the longer pieces, you sit those at the bottom. Now this wouldn't fit in a Ziploc bag, so I've just chucked it inside one of these little paper folders. Make sure you put those at the bottom, because if you sit it at the top, it's going to hang off the edge there and it's not going to be flat. It does make a big difference. Keep your molds in good condition and they will last you for a very, very, very long time. The rubber, the silicone that Bruce uses is top of the line. I've never had any trouble with these molds cracking, tearing, breaking like I had with molds from other companies. Bruce's molds are top of the line. Here in Australia you do pay around $50 per mold, but his service is second to none, shipping is second to none, etc. So the first thing, mold care, taking care of the molds. Make sure you keep them in Ziploc bags, make sure you keep a little bit of baby powder inside of them, and don't stack them too high, always keep them level. The next thing I want to mention is about scraping the mold. I started off with this one here. It's just a plastic spatula for filling wall gaps, etc. Now you want your spatula to be wider than the width of your mold, so that as you scrape you can come through in one clean pass. It worked, but as Bruce mentioned on his website, get yourself a metal spatula. You may not think it would make much of a difference. I mean, this has a nice sharp point on it, just as this has a nice sharp point on it. You wouldn't think there'd be any difference, but trust me, after casting these thousands of times, there's a huge difference in the way that the metal flushes against the rubber here. So if you want to get into it, yes, you could use a piece of wood or a spatula or a popsicle stick or something like that. You could use a plastic spatula, no worries, but if you want to get into it and you want to do it seriously, get yourself a metal spatula. Now this is not as wide as this one. You could go hunting around and find a wider one, but this is enough. It covers the width of the mold. Now I'll talk when I start to do my demonstrations about the angle that you need to have this at to be able to scrape cleanly and smoothly in one single pass. But we'll talk more about that when you're scraping. So tools. Obviously you need your mold. Make sure you've got a good spatula. Now you don't have to spend lots of money on one of these, but I prefer a metal one over the plastic. It makes a difference. I don't know why. Okay, let's talk about pound boards. Bruce shows you some examples on his website to be able to create a pound board with some foam underneath here. I think he uses kitchen sponges, and he instructs you on his website to pour the plaster, or as you're pouring it, pound on the table. That's going to help shape the mold a little bit and release air bubbles. Now, that does work, but it's not the best way to do it. But I've made myself one of these. It is electric. This connects to my battery charger for my car, and sitting underneath this great big piece of sticky tape is the inside piece, the vibrating motor from one of those cushions that you get to put behind your back when you're driving. I bought it off eBay for $9 including postage. I ripped out the cushion. The cushion has long since disappeared, and I have now inside here a little variable speed motor. It has two settings on it, high and low. I only ever use the low one, which I'll talk about later on. The high one has a tendency to make the plaster jump around inside the mold. This just makes the whole casting process a lot easier. I built myself a simple little board. I got a wooden piece, a wooden board. I think this is probably, that looks like 8mm, 9mm. Hardboard. On the bottom are 4 pieces of foam. They're all the same height, and they've been hot glued down to this board. Then I've just attached the motor in the middle. That way I can flip it over. The motor isn't touching the ground. I can sit my block on there, switch this on, and it will vibrate this. And then I can use both hands to carefully pour the mold. Now I'll talk about pouring molds again shortly. It is very important on the way that you do it to reduce the number of air bubbles. Okay, so we've seen a few of the basics. Taking care of your molds, some of the tools that I use, building yourself a little board, which I'll do a further demonstration of later on. It's fairly straightforward. Bruce has some great instructions on his website. A word about plaster choice. Plaster of Paris is readily available everywhere, and it's super cheap. It's also super brittle. It has a very, very low PSI rating, pounds per square inch. Is that correct? Someone may be able to correct me on this. Don't have my folder here with all the references in it. But it's very, very brittle. It's not very dense. It can be crushed very easily. There's all different types of plasters, especially when you start to look at casting plasters, etc. I've tried dental plaster, I've tried casting plaster, I've tried Hydrostone, I've tried Hydrocal, and there's a couple of really good ones that we can't get here in Australia that I'd love to try, but I just can't afford the shipping. They come in big 20-kilogram bags, and they're very, very expensive to ship here. I like to use Hydrostone. It's probably a medium level. It's much better than Plaster of Paris. It's better than casting plaster. It's better than dental plaster. It's not as heavy as dental plaster. It's sort of in the middle between sort of Plaster of Paris being the worst piece of crap you can use, and all the way up the top up here for stuff that I've seen like Merlin's Magic seems to be one of the popular ones on again Bruce's website. If you go and have a look at it, www.hirstarts.com. Huge amounts of reference there. So choice of plaster is important. If you want your pieces to last for a while, if you want the possibility of dropping something like this on the ground and it's still surviving with little damage, this would smash into 100 pieces if it was Plaster of Paris. But this is Castrum Hydrostone. Now I'm not going to drop this on the floor just for the sake of the demonstration, but it will be a lot stronger. It's just one of the side effects, unfortunately, you have to live with when you cast with plaster, is that things will break, things will chip. You can add, I might talk about it later on, you can add all different sorts of dyes to your casting medium, so that instead of being a white plaster, it actually turns brown or black or red or whatever your surface colour is going to be. So I could add a brown pigment to my plaster, and this would then be a brown coat. So if I did chip this, it wouldn't be a big white gap, it'd still be brown. Anyway, we'll talk further about that later on. Anyway, I think that's about enough for part one, just a basic introduction. Let's jump in now to the actual process that I follow to make casting enjoyable.